Here's a PR tip for the UN. If you want to add credibility to your cause, hysterical rhetoric like global boiling doesn't help. It has the reverse effect. It makes you look like irrational fools. South Australian Senator Alec Antic made this very serious point, very humorously, in federal parliament this week.
We know that the climate alarmists terrify people with their language, but even by their own standards, this latest foray into the catastrophic language is pretty outrageous. It's quite frankly sent the left in this building off like a rocket. They've been running around all week, waving their arms around like the robot from Lost in Space, and it's all because of this, I believe. But you see, this isn't about facts, and it isn't about data, science or the environment. It's about politics, control and fear. And the alarmists need to remain fresh with their language to stay on the cutting edge. Otherwise, some other activists will crawl out from their mum's basement and take their mantle as the chief alarmist. So when I was a kid in the 1980s, Madam Acting Deputy President, they used the term greenhouse effect. But who's going to fear that? The greenhouse is a friendly place. So when the greenhouse effect became defunct, they started using global warming. But you're not going to frighten kids with that, so they moved on to climate change, and then they could blame a snowstorm and a hurricane from climate change. But they needed to grow the fear exponentially, and then we got climate crisis, climate emergency, climate breakdown and even climate apocalypse. But the question really is where to from here? And so I've taken the liberty of coming up with 5 suggested names that I think will be much more terrifying, so that the UN can use them in advance. I've come up with number 1, global climate inferno, which sounds pretty terrifying. Number 2, mega universe heat death. That one should work. Number 3, super global spine-chillingly hot, which I think might terrify the kids. Stop using your stove, you capitalists. I reckon that one will work. And then the final one that I held up for consideration is you will die soon, which I think should do the job. Terrify everybody, inform nobody. That's the way of the world now.
South Australian Senator Alec Antic speaking in the Senate this week. Global boiling aside, let's put that aside and get back to the more rational side of the debate. Former UK Labor Prime Minister Tony Blair told the political editor of the New Statesman magazine in the UK this past week something that shocked a lot of people. He said, quote, "It's the single biggest global challenge and Britain should play its part in that, but there's not much Britain can do about it when 1 year's rise in China's emissions would outscore the whole of Britain's emissions for a year." His argument seems to reflect that of many Australian commentators that the real zero in net zero is the zero effect that any change we make in our country would have on global warming. That it's just shooting ourselves in the foot to cut back on our coal and other industry to reduce carbon emissions, while other bigger countries continue to increase theirs. Blair went on to say, "Don't ask us to do a huge amount when frankly whatever we do in Britain is not really going to impact climate change. The number one issue today, and this is where Britain could play a part, is how do you finance the energy transition? Because basically the developed world's emissions are going down, but the developing world's are going up. These countries have got to grow. So how do you finance the transition? Secondly, how do you accelerate the technology?" Well, I'll tell you how. Capitalism. More technology and more development, not less. That's the real solution to climate change. But it's not the one that the Greens want to hear. They've been trying to use global warming to push a socialist and globalist agenda of centralised control. So having a real technological solution isn't in their political interests. It'll just stuff them right up. With energy prices on the up and up, adding to other inflation pressures, Aussies, like their British cousins, are fast waking up to the fact that we might be, as the London Telegraph newspaper puts it, moving towards net zero at a speed near the limits of what the electorate will bear. The Labor Party in the UK has already all but abandoned its £28 billion a year green prosperity plan. Labor leader Keir Starmer's plan to decarbonise all electricity generation by 2030 is an ambitious and risky one that will also cost billions, so it may also get the chop by election time. Tony Blair's comments reminded me of the excellent argument made by trigonometry podcast host Konstantin Kisin in his Oxford University debate that went viral earlier this year.
We are told that your generation cares more than any other about one issue in particular, and that issue is climate change. We're told that many of you suffer from climate anxiety. You wish to save the planet. And for tonight, and tonight only, I will join you. I will join you in worshipping at the feet of St. Greta of climate change. Let us all accept right here, right now, that we are living through a climate emergency and our stocks of polar bears are running extremely low. I join you in this view. I truly do. Now, what are we to do about this huge problem facing humanity? What can we in Britain do? We can only do one thing. You know why? This country is responsible for 2% of global carbon emissions, which means that if Britain was to sink into the sea right now, it would make absolutely no difference to the issue of climate change. You know why? Because the future of the climate is going to be decided in Asia and in Latin America by poor people who couldn't give a shit about saving the planet.
He's right. The arrogance and self-righteousness of the West's coffee culture set is completely out of touch with global economic and social reality. Do we seriously think that shutting down our few remaining coal-fired power stations, sending energy prices soaring, and putting our national security and well-being at risk is going to make one dot of difference while China builds 100 new coal power stations a year? I mean, seriously. As Kisin says, the success or failure of efforts to reduce carbon emissions are not going to be decided by Britain or Australia.
It's going to be decided by poor people in Asia and Latin America who don't care about saving the planet. You know why? Because they're poor. Because they're poor. I come from Russia, which is not a poor country, it's a middle-income country. 20% of households in Russia do not have an indoor toilet. What they have is an outdoor toilet. And I don't mean one of those nice portaloos that we get here. I don't even mean a Glastonbury portaloo. I mean a wooden shack with a hole in the ground that holds a collected fermented memory of the last 10,000 visits. How many of you are going to go home tonight and say, let's rip out our bathroom and erect a Siberian shithouse in the back garden? And if you're not, why should they? 120 million people in China do not have enough food. I don't mean that they don't get dessert, I mean they suffer from malnutrition. That means that their immune system is breaking down because they don't have enough food. You're not going to get them to stay poor. You are not going to get these people to stay poor. You're not even going to get them to not want to be richer. And so, I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, there is only one thing we can do in this country to stop climate change, and that is to make scientific and technological breakthroughs that will create the clean energy that is not only clean, but also cheap.
That's Konstantin Kisin, the Russian-British satirist, author and political commentator, co-host of the Trigonometry podcast there, speaking at the Oxford Union. He's dead right. So stop the silly protests, kids. Hit the books. Study, learn about energy technology if you're really worried about climate change, and help find the solution to our global energy needs that will replace fossil fuels. Because the answer is development for developing nations, not some idiot Gaia-worshipping green myth that's both anti-human and anti-technology.